What remains of a photographer's life when the years have passed? When his actions, his thoughts, his inscription in reality are no more than traces scattered in the profound labyrinth of time. Who can say where the present ends? Who knows where memory begins? Hans Steiner has left a vast heritage of nearly 100,000 photographs. At 120th of a second, these images barely represent 15 minutes of the opening of the shutter of a camera. That is, 30 seconds of opening for each year's work. A chasm which gives the true measure of things, in which time becomes the veritable substance of photography. A time from which arise in fragments the happiness and misery of men. Fragments that reveal in a flash the tragedy of lives, that evoke lost hopes and reawaken lost loves. Photography then becomes a deep well of incurable nostalgia, the sharp shadow of forgotten thoughts. It creates legends, cuts across intimacy, and gives memory a material existence to which others will give meaning. Hans Steiner was born in Bern on May 15, 1907, on Sandreinstraße in the district of Sugenbach. He was therefore a contemporary of Hergé and Paul-Émile Victor. 1907 is the year in which Pablo Picasso paints the Demoiselles d'Avignon in Paris, whilst Alfred Stieglitz photographs the steerage in New York. Both artists open the way on a century that will radically change the way we look at art, that will revolutionize artistic creation and give photography an essential place in art and culture. Photography will become the natural ally of freedom of expression, criticism, and the subversion of ideas. But it will also become a potent instrument of power, manipulation, and illusion. (1907) is also marked by the death of Alfred Jarry, the strange writer to whom Steiner will pay an unusual tribute 20 years later by photographing in the Swiss sky a surprising ubu. Until this moment, in the same way chance plays ironically with the subversive chaos of life, weaving relationships that give every appearance of reason, Steiner is apprenticed to a notary at the age of 16, just like in a novel by Balzac, before becoming what he has probably dreamt of since childhood, a photographer. Living in the Grisons in 1927, Hans Steiner is first of all influenced by pictorialism, this art of appearances which, by denying reality and using soft focus and sublimation, pretends for several decades to give photography its prestige. But in the interwar years, reality imposes its formal rules on photography. Hans Steiner therefore learns the modern language of this medium, which lies between art and documentation. It has the power to give poetry to landscapes, events, faces, or even objects. Photography becomes creative by exploring the many points of view and compositions that give rhythm to the image, thereby creating the original language of the modern image. Hans Steiner gradually transforms his representation of the world into an archive of his own life. He begins by perfectly imitating the very unique, subtle and light as air style of Albert Steiner, the great photographer of the Grisons. His namesake becomes his first role model. He then draws his formal inspiration from the aesthetics of the times. He builds his own style and discovers from one image to the next the extent of his talent. Hans Steiner does not attend any of the modernist schools of the day, but he is receptive to the aesthetic and visual experiences of the time. He integrates into his experimental procedures Laszlo Moholy-Nagy's way of seeing, the perspective of Alexander Rodchenko, the social concern of August Sander, as well as the formalism of Albert Renger-Patch. High-angle and low-angle shots, diagonal points of view, perspective or aerial shots are the formal techniques of the avant-garde and the new photography. These aesthetic statements become widespread archetypes in the 30s and 40s. From 1932, Hans Steiner works for illustrated newspapers. He adopts the Swiss documentary style, subjective and poetic, which he shares with his contemporaries Paul Sen, Gotthard Schuh, Hans Staub, Jakob Tugener, Emil Schultes, and Theo Frey. It is from this period that dates his pronounced taste for uncanny images, which did not interest anyone at the time, but which are now considered surprising shots, particularly due to the influence of the films by David Lynch. The strange, the irrational, the unexpected reveal an original dimension of Hans Steiner's work that could not be recognized at the time. Hans Steiner returns to Bern in 1934 at the age of 27, living on the third floor of a building in the Spitalgasse. He opens a workshop and a laboratory. He also founds a portrait studio, which is soon entrusted to colleagues, while he undertakes countless photographic documentary assignments for Sie und Schweizer Illustrierte, Berner Illustrierte, and afterwards for the weekly newspaper Die Woche. Society creates itself through the image that ensures its representation. From this fascinating interplay of mirrors without reflections, which results in neither truth or lies, a new view of the world emerges. Photography captures the tragedies and the injustices of the world, but also the hopes, and above all, the infinite beauty of things. If it is possible to create critical images without a political point of view, it is impossible to escape the construction of meaning that develops a message out of an image. In the 1930s, editors of magazines and illustrated newspapers produced this message efficiently and professionally. Through the use of images, they ally the exaltation of modern industrialism with the 600-year-old myth of national independence. The rise of Nazism, whose symbols haunt every aspect of Swiss political, sporting and community life, cause concern and anxiety. This leads to compromise and to political cowardice in order to please, trade with and finally give way to the powerful German neighbour and to its avatar Mussolini, who is strangely awarded a Doctor Honoris Causa degree in 1936 by the University of Lausanne. But this terrifying fool's bargain, which many then believed to be a cunning peace bargained with wolves, inevitably paves the way for totalitarianism and war. Si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war, is the politicians' mantra. They are not rehearsing their Latin, but their so-called promises of peace, justice and fraternity. In the same vein, referring to the warrior spirit of the Roman Empire, the ideological and hygienist motto appears, mens sana in corpore sano, a healthy mind in a healthy body. It promotes the practice of nationalist sport and physical training for a generation living on borrowed time, which has little time to enjoy its beauty, its freedom and its youth in the wake of the spectre that is gradually covering Europe and mortgaging its future. Hans Steiner has always been attracted by the mountain. Skiing in winter, hiking and mountaineering in summer. It was indeed in a cabin in the Bernese Alps that he met Annie Sessler, whom he married in October 1934. Mountains imposed their aesthetic laws on the photographer and their legacy of the romantic sublime. Steiner shows us a philosophy based on contemplative pleasure, but also on courage and humility, an attitude necessary in order to face the dangers that threaten both the most foolhardy of tourists and the most experienced climbers. The novelist Susie Mank, a close friend of Steiner's, recorded in a now-forgotten novel, Frühling im Schnee, the lifestyle and ideals of this generation. It is through the Eiger and its 1,600 metres still unconquered north face that Hans Steiner finally finds fame in dramatic circumstances. From 1935 to 1938, in front of hundreds of witnesses watching from the terrace of the Kleine Scheidegg Hotel, German, Austrian and Italian climbers follow each other, many dying in fatal accidents. The nationalist and political objectives of these attempts do not fool anyone. Objectives that are far removed from the tortured and divine dimension of the mountain as seen by the Romantics, or the aristocratic tradition imposed since the mid-19th century by British mountaineers. From 1935, Hans Steiner closely follows all expeditions to the Eiger, notably the one in which Tony Kurtz dies, a few meters from powerless rescuers. In July 1938, he documents the success of the German expedition in which the famous Austrian mountaineer Heinrich Harrer takes part. Harrer is a member of the SS and the future author of 7 Years in Tibet. Hans Steiner's photographs, especially those taken from a plane, are a true stroke of genius. His photos are published worldwide. Hans Steiner has now made his name and reputation and is building a powerful body of work. When war breaks out in September 1939 and the army is mobilized, the portrait of Henry Guisan, taken some years earlier by Hans Steiner, is chosen as the official icon. A new star, making him a general, is added hastily by hand to his uniform on the photograph. This portrait sells massively in Switzerland in order to raise money for the families of soldiers for a price of 4 francs 50 compared to 2 francs 50 for the version without the cap. Hans Steiner begins to follow the general as of his swearing in. He is now authorized to follow the army wherever they are, during recruitment, when training in close combat, entrenched in the cold and snow, or transporting around Switzerland equipment that appears to be out of date. Only in appearance, because in times of war, communication means disinformation. Hundreds of photographs by Hans Steiner are used by Guisan's administrative staff. Admirer of Pétain and Mussolini, General Guisan purposely constructs his image as a leader, therefore censoring all images showing him in a friendly, casual or sociable manner. On June 17, 1940, 42,000 soldiers of the French army, narrowly escaping from the Germans, seek refuge in the Swiss Jura. Among them, 16,000 Polish soldiers. Hans Steiner photographs these exhausted men, temporarily saved, perhaps from death. War has erupted in the fragile neutrality of Switzerland. Unarmed, these soldiers are interned in Switzerland, as will be later many Russians, Americans or Germans. In 1945, French and Belgian children are sheltered in Switzerland by the Red Cross. Deeply moved, Hans Steiner delicately captures the plight of these children, orphans of violence. Beyond individual efforts made by many Swiss to shelter or help the victims of fascism, the Swiss government maintains until the end a policy based on a reactionary tradition of rejection. In 1945, the Intergovernmental Committee of the Allies orders Switzerland to shelter nearly 2,000 Jewish children who survived the German concentration camps. An official letter from the Swiss administration, dated May 30th, 1945, reassures the Secretary of the Federal Department of Justice and Police, stating in the third paragraph of page 2 that a certain proportion of the children that we will receive will be passed on in time to the Intergovernmental Committee, which will then have to find a solution so we can get rid of them. History now shows us that certain expressions are charged with inhumanity. The post-war period is a race for growth, but also for oblivion, a period made of myths, half-truths, and ideological constructions aiming at writing an acceptable history. With its production facilities intact, its vast expertise in the scientific, financial and industrial sectors, and also thanks to the Cold War, which contributes at just the right time to help it turn an inglorious page in its history. Post-war Switzerland focuses on a consumerist and resolutely optimistic approach. Using the principles of Taylorism, production grows and tourism revives. Switzerland is a vast building site from which rise dams, roads, tunnels and bridges. These gigantic projects require an ever-increasing workforce, mainly consisting of foreign immigrants. In many publications, often illustrated by Hans Steiner's photos, workers are shown without cynicism but with insight as the craftsmen of future wealth. The Swiss nation therefore transcends a mythical tradition while exalting its modernity. In the 1950s, Hans Steiner lives on Waisenhausplatz, phone number 031 242 37. He undertakes many trips outside of Europe with the support of the Dutch manufacturer Van Leer. From Africa to China, from India to Indonesia, he discovers from his plane surprising landscapes of exceptional diversity. Photographed in black and white, they become abstract and unreal. On land, the happiness of the moment and the warm welcome he receives mix with the most appalling poverty. There is an urgency to change the world. Hans Steiner is then working for the prestigious magazine Die Woche. This humanist weekly publication is breaking away from its nationalist discourse to open the public's mind to the outside world and help them understand it better. In 30 years, Hans Steiner photographs hundreds of women. Whether these images are commissions, personal projects, photographs of models, friends, confidants, or secret lovers, it makes no difference. These photographs often show a real bond, express a hint of desire, and testify to ephemeral happiness. Ways of seeing that might perhaps become legendary when persistent and obsessive melancholy appears. Kisses are rare, which are a promise of intimacy, on the edge of a freedom that many at that time do not know what to do with. Whether expressing desire or artifice, worldly or spontaneous, the figure of the woman structures Hans Steiner's vision of the world. It probably embodies the feeling of happiness to be alive among the fragile beauty of things. In Hans Steiner's vast body of work lies the promise of a destiny that might be invented through our new perspective. In photography, the boundary between representation, reality or fiction is never totally clear. Each image is interpreted through the lens of culture, philosophy of history, or the unconscious. Truth is multiple, illusion constant, facts confused and ambiguous. At the end of his life, Hans Steiner has built a unique archive without any precedent or model, a true visual encyclopedia. By thematically classifying nearly 100,000 photographs without adding any titles or respecting chronology, he has created a work which is a true literature of facts. These photographs evoke society, industry, war, women, machinery, fashion, sport, leisure, and sometimes strangeness. They are the hidden face of a life, the mirror of secret thoughts that behind the veil draw the contours of what was perhaps the photographer's existential journey. It is the inevitable passage between the private and the public, between dream and reality, between the ephemeral and the eternal, the place where doubt gives rise to legend. This archive is his complete body of work, It gathers together facts, forms, souls, and lives that through the glance of an eye come back to us briefly, like ghosts haunting history, sometimes making it beautiful. There is such vanity in our activities. Let's dedicate the best of them to the sublime, says a book with the significant title of Swiss Miracle, richly illustrated by Hans Steiner. This is the epitaph of the beliefs of a now industrialized society whose policies are ever more closely linked to economics. Nobody really knows, or will ever know, what the sublime was for Hans Steiner, who died on May 3rd, 1962, from a heart attack at the age of 55. If there are any hints, however ephemeral, of his thoughts and actions, they are indeed in his pictures. 100,000 photographs, 15 minutes of an open shutter, the destiny of a photographer, the story of a lifetime.